Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the 10K Collective, a subset of the Amazing FBA podcast for 6, 7, 8-figure Amazon sellers. I know it says behind me British Amazon sellers if you're watching the video. Actually, that's a bit of a lie, really. We have more podcast listeners in the US than in Britain, quite a few in Germany, some in India, various places. So you're all welcome. And today we're talking to Will Tjernlund of Goat Consulting, who help brands and manufacturers sell better on Amazon. Will has an amazing overview, I think, of the entire process, having both sold a load of stuff on Amazon himself personally back in the day, also helped his family business transition from B2B to B2C, so selling direct. So a fantastic thinker in this space, and you're warmly welcome back to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm excited to talk about kind of what's the next marketplace threat or what's the biggest threat to Amazon kind of in the future because it seems like they've been rolling lately, but at the same time so has everyone else in the e-commerce space. So it's an interesting space.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're talking about, I suppose, a threat to Amazon, but an opportunity to us as e-commerce business owners. And specifically, we talked in one of the last podcast episodes that we've talked to. We can redo that. Specifically, we talked in one of the last episodes about the fact that because Amazon is actually struggling with the fulfillment side and I guess logistics generally, they're actually trying to, for the first time ever, slow down their growth. And of course, if the e-commerce demand is off the hook and the market as a whole of e-commerce is bigger by dollar revenue, and Amazon is trying to slow that down, they're then losing market share. So I suppose there is an opportunity for competitors to take a piece off Amazon, ironically, when times are the greatest. You mentioned Shopify already, but I guess there's a few things that are specific to the fulfillment area that is an interesting place. So tell me, you got a specific thing you want to address here? Just go with
Yeah,
it. Tell us what you're on your mind.
Postmates, which is pretty popular here in the US, which they can deliver all sorts of stuff from food to groceries. They recently partnered up with Walgreens, which is one of the larger uh, drugstores or convenience stores in the US, so like very 7-Eleven like, but then with more medical and more kind of prescription drugs and that type of thing. And basically, if you think of a large 7-Eleven, they essentially have every SKU you could ever imagine that you would need on short notice. And the interesting part is that with them teaming up with someone like Postmates, they can not only deliver these products to customers quickly, but they probably can deliver them to fairly cheaply too. Say a traditional Postmates order might take 30 minutes to be delivered to you and may cost anywhere from $3 to $5 for them to deliver it. Well, we know here in the US that it basically costs you $2 to ship anything, $2.70 to ship anything in the US. And it's going to take 1 to 2 days. And so a lot of these items that, if you think about it, are sold in, say, like a 7-Eleven type store, aren't sold usually very much on Amazon unless it's in extreme bulk because they're these kind of sub $10 items that Amazon has trouble with their fulfillment centers doing profitably and third-party sellers have trouble doing profitably. But if you can have someone go to a 7-Eleven type store in their Uber car and pick up 15 orders at once, making $2 to $5 an order, and then drop those off around the neighborhood, they make a good $20, $30 in the span of an hour or so. And at the same time, you order something online that actually was able to show up within an hour, which is a very rare kind of case. And so for the longest time, at least for myself, I always thought of the biggest competitor with Amazon was going to be someone like Walmart because they had all the SKUs, they had all the infrastructure, they had all the cash flow and such to be able to afford a fight with Amazon. But I always thought it would be very difficult since Amazon's warehouse and fulfillment centers could now do same day and next day shipping, that it would take a very long time, if not like a decade, for Walmart to be able to get those capabilities. I personally had not thought of kind of redoing the whole delivery system in general and having gig economy workers deliver from brick and mortar stores. And now that that's kind of becoming more and more a possibility, that seems much more likely than say someone like Target shipping from their store to a UPS center, to a USPS center, to your home. Just having someone drive it straight to your home sounds a lot more efficient and helpful for everyone.
Very, very interesting. I mean, a couple of reflections. First of all, as a London resident, where obviously UK is vastly, vastly smaller than the USA. In fact, the area of the UK is slightly smaller than Wisconsin, which I understand has 500,000 people in it, whereas we have 66 million. So it's way more densely packed. So from a fulfillment point of view, and that's one of the reasons I think that e-commerce penetration as a percentage of retail in the UK, I believe maybe the highest in the developed world, certainly bigger than the US, because of course it's so much easier to do. And in London, basically, these days it's a very, very strange world. Literally yesterday, on the 5th of November 2020, all the shops are shut except for essentials, which vary really, they're basically food based. Um, and yet the streets are full of cars because everyone's commuting by car. They're scared of the underground or the tube, the subway you'd call it in New York. And yet you get run over by Deliveroo guys every 5 seconds. So this is very much the reality from a consumer point of view. It's physically, you just stand on the street in London, you can literally see the transition from the high street to the delivery guys, going maybe from a shop that has a shut storefront at the front, but at the back the guys are working incredibly hard to create takeaway food, which is just whizzing out to everyone. So that's very much a reality I see on the ground here, and it's interesting that is probably more intensely the case in the UK than it will be in the US. We may be actually ahead of that trend just because of the fulfillment logistics. The other thing is Prime Now is an app that I have on my phone, and again, I've been used to the point where this is really funny, but embarrassing, but it's the truth that when I had an argument with my wife a while ago, I thought, shit, I need to placate her, and I just got her some jewelry and some chocolates. It was ridiculous, but I got it on Prime Now because I thought I better get something in here quickly, and I couldn't get to the shops because they were shut. And literally, the guy turned out with 2 hours later. So I guess I've got used to this idea that it's possible. I've got used to the idea of ordering pizzas from decades ago, and I think for me, it feels like a natural expectation that is there from me as a consumer. And I guess what you're talking about is the sort of guerrilla warfare style solution is actually growing a lot faster than what looked like the sort of corporate type solution, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, yeah, exactly. Letting the market decide with a bunch of little MVPs and mini risks between all these different stores, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because exactly like you said, they got the restaurant that now is turned into more of a factory that assembles these dishes and gets them out the door as fast as possible to the delivery driver waiting, kind of thing. And they're like assembling these purchase orders to their shipping drivers, like just like a factory would. And it's the same exact thing where if you wanted to buy some ibuprofen or Tylenol quickly, a Butterfingers bar, and a bottle of wine, Amazon Prime Now might not be able to help you. But there is some store down the street that might be able to.
By the way, that sounds like a terrible evening in. What happened with the Tylenol?
Yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. That's for your kids who are sick. You're just
Okay. And you want to
enjoying
go and
yourself for
drink
the
wine
night.
in the corner to
Yeah,
cope with the
yeah,
fact you get sick.
exactly. Yeah,
I get
it's
you.
gonna be a
Yeah.
long night.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. But I love that the fact that what you've just said, and like joking apart, that is really close to kind of consumers' real life needs. The thing about corporates is that, and it's interesting you reference Walmart because obviously Walmart's fulfillment capability back in the day was way better than Amazon's, but it was geared to this business to business, big, consistent size packages, consistent weight, etc. And I believe that Jeff Bezos stole Walmart's fulfillment and logistics guys and sort of recreated and then fine tuned that. But it's interesting that maybe neither is best placed to really deal with the marketplace reality now, I guess is what you're saying.
Interesting side note, a company that I know the founders from I used to teach an entrepreneurship class to his high school class that he's now was in college, dropped out, and he has a really interesting concept. I think the company's called Pickup. But say you live in a dormitory or apartment building and you are heading to the store. You can then ping everyone within like a 500-foot or say less than half kilometer area saying, hey, I'm going to the store and who else needs something? And for $1 upcharge, anyone else can add something to your shopping list. And so that way you kind of become the gig driver by going to the store, and then you go to the store, come back, and you made 15 bucks. And so that kind of stuff where it's like they're all trying to solve that last mile and how do you do it as well as possible. And then basically who wants to do that last mile? And I've seen robots do it. I've seen gig economy drivers do it. I've seen now neighbors do it. And it's kind of what's going to be most efficient for the market and what's going to be best for everyone.
Very interesting. And what this makes you think of is a couple of things. The obvious point, if you're talking about robots, suddenly we're talking about Amazon and the drones. And again, in the UK, I think it's less regulated than the US when it comes to air stuff. They've done some experiments in Cambridgeshire, which is Cambridge, obviously a very renowned university for high-tech startups because it's full of incredibly bright people. There is one college in Cambridge that has more Nobel Prizes for physics than France. So just to put it in perspective, and that's one thing that looks like an obvious thing, and it's the 21st century, and of course it's about robots. But the other thing that strikes me that's very interesting is it's not always about the physical robots of from the earliest days of science fiction. It's people moving, but directed by artificial intelligence. And I know that Amazon warehouses, for example, of course, they got their physical robots, and that looks very dramatic on TV. But actually, a lot of what their paths of the workers through the warehouse, I believe, is driven by artificial intelligence algorithms. And in a sense, what this is all about is using very simple manual human labor, which is incredibly hard to replicate with the robot because physically handling an egg requires years of programming and that sort of thing. But the aggregation of need and the matching of need to fulfillment capability is being done by the AI, right? Just like Uber and all these other things, Airbnb and so forth. It's sort of aggregation stuff, right? So what strikes me about this. So how can we take advantage of this? A fascinating trend you put your finger on, and this is something I've really hadn't really spotted at all. So very, very interesting, kind of breaking news for me. How do we take advantage of this then as e-commerce sellers?
And that kind of comes back to our last conversation with um, maybe just not being fully Amazon dependent, or at least having some sort of merchant fulfillment capability if something like this does pop up. I don't know how they're going to do this. Where are these couriers going to only work with large corporations at first? Are there going to be a third party marketplace for these couriers that you can be a seller that jumps on there as a item that can be delivered in 2 hours? Or I don't know exactly how to do it. It's just being aware of it, knowing it's coming down the pipeline, and just keeping your finger on the pulse to know that as soon as there is an opportunity for you to jump in and service your products to customers, that you're ready for it and that you're not caught with your hands tied behind your back.
Again, what strikes me about this is that it seems to be the theme of our conversations, that Paul Graham thing, do things that don't scale. I guess the scaling piece is an issue, but I think it always strikes me that when people want to start an e-commerce business from scratch, or maybe they were already in it, but they want to move on to Amazon, the first thing is to find somebody, literally a person who wants to literally buy your product, not say nice things about it, but they'll give you money. And then the second thing is to find 10 more people who'll do that. Now, that's a kind of startup question, and hence Paul Graham says that stuff. And it's interesting to reflect that companies which are now huge, like Groupon, I believe they spent months thrashing around. They literally made their first sales to the guys in the same office building as them because they manually knocked on doors. Now, what's interesting is that it's almost come full circle because now maybe the greatest next opportunity is the same thing as a startup would naturally do, which is work on a small scale, think local in a sense, and then try and scale up lots of locals rather than scale up by putting your stuff into the massive machine that is an FBA system or whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
A perfect example of that, honestly, is something that you would just never think of being like a D2C type brand, but it's something that my fiance and I love. Is we order from a company called Imperfect Produce, and they do exactly stuff that doesn't scale. They go and find local farmers who have vegetables that they can't sell to grocery stores because they're not pretty enough, and buy them for pennies on the dollar, and then assemble boxes full of produce and deliver them to my doorstep once a week. And it's a imperfect produce truck that only is delivering imperfect produce. They're not using UPS. They've made connections with farmers locally in this Minnesota area, assembled these boxes, and then for 25 bucks a month, I get these boxes show up, or 25 bucks a week, I think it is. I get these boxes of produce that these carrots look slightly off or something like that, but they're fine carrots. And it's a very interesting thing of them figuring out the last mile, selling a product that traditionally wasn't D2C, and cutting out the middlemen in a commodity type market like carrots. And it's all these types of things that, like, well, this doesn't scale, this doesn't scale, well, this doesn't scale. Well, Imperfect Produce is now in like whatever 50 cities throughout the US. and so it does scale. There's like misfit produce and it's all those kind of things. And so it's like the whole business model basically sounds like something that doesn't scale based on something that doesn't scale based on something that doesn't scale. But
Beautiful.
once you get enough happy customers that actually can figure it out, you just go territory by territory, back to that talk.
Yeah, this is so fascinating, man. I mean, what I guess, what I love about your thinking, which is I'm just obsessed with pushing in that direction now with the podcast and with the masterminds, everything is just starting from first principles, like a good physicist rather than like somebody who's like a mechanic. A mechanic works with the car in the way it works. A physicist goes, okay, we got a problem. How do we solve it based on raw, knowledge of physics and then a lot of experimentation? And because I think that the what we are looking for, I suppose, is on the one hand solving a problem for consumers, right? The second thing is adding value. As you said, they've got a commodity and they've turned it into something that's much more valuable. It's doing stuff that has a built-in barrier to entry. And I think the weird thing is, if I had to advise somebody 15 years ago about starting a business, I'd say you've got to get online. The Jeff Bezos' insight when he was walking in Wall Street, he looked at the growth of the internet and went, this is crazy. I would almost say, if I wanted a defensible business now, I would find not in COVID, it's not very COVID proof to own a hairdresser, but something like that somebody's not going to drive 50 miles for a haircut unless it's really high end. And you got those in London. And I know that some of the guys who worked on that, they'll give you $500 haircut. Okay. But mostly it's like something that doesn't scale. It's very local that you cannot replace with a robot, that cannot be outsourced to the Philippines, that cannot just be bought by Amazon and turned into an addition to the Amazon empire. And this kind of reminds you of that kind of business model. It's very defensible because how is somebody going to recreate that from the outside, right?
Yeah, I always think of it too without even really thinking about it, but just from kind of my blue collar mindset and stuff is if you do unsexy stuff that people don't want to do, they'll pay you money for it. And so like my Amazon agency, it's like we got 1,000 listings that all need new photos. It's like that's a perfect unsexy stuff that no one wants to do. It's really annoying to upload 5 photos per 1,000 SKUs. Half of them aren't going to be accepted. You have to go through and double check it and all that kind of stuff. And it's like perfect. I can sit right in there where no one wants to do it. It's unsexy. No one's like, I'm going to create an agency that helps people re-upload photos, And so I sit in this kind of flying under the radar thing. I've always, back to like the Amazon private label seller, it's always better to have 100 SKUs that sell 10 units a day than 10 SKUs that sell, 100 SKUs that sell 10 units a day than 10 SKUs that sell 100 units a day kind of thing, where you distribute your risk, you fly below the radar, you're not selling these sexy products that everyone wants to sell and me too and copy you right away, and you just can kind of sit there and fly below the radar for much longer time than you go into a sexy category with lots of sales and lots of competitors. That's a fun category to be in that everyone else wants to be in.
Makes a lot of sense to me, and particularly for most of us, as you said in the past episode, that it's not about having more money than the big corporates because we don't, but we have to be smarter. And I think you have more time to work out what is the actual smart thing to do, an experiment, if you haven't got people breathing down your neck 3 months after you start, which is generally what happens on Amazon with a big category, as you say. So look, I guess what we're talking about is also very lockdown proof. Now, I guess what you were saying to me before we got on air is, look, COVID's not going anywhere. E-commerce is here to stay. What do you think of the medium-term implications? Never mind panicking about, can I get my stuff fulfilled in Q4 via FBA? We've talked about that in another podcast, and that's very important to survive the next quarter. But going into 2021 and even beyond, depending on how good your crystal ball is, let's talk about COVID proof and e-commerce and how that plays out. Let's kind of open it up a bit.
Yeah, in general, I just think that from what I've seen and from what I've seen from my clients and seen anecdotally from family and friends, is a lot of people ordering stuff on Amazon that they never thought about ordering on Amazon previously, just because of it, just because of COVID. Like a friend telling me that they'd never even thought about ordering toilet paper on Amazon until COVID. And now they started ordering kind of everyday essentials like that. And so that kind of that stronghold that brick and mortar had over e-commerce for the longest time of like dish soap and all these kind of daily things, I think are going to slowly but surely, that trend's going to keep going where I think a lot of these companies, like I were using Clorox before, or some of these kind of big CPG brands, a lot of the time they were doing like sub 5% of revenue on Amazon of their total revenue. And I think it would be really interesting if that becomes 10, 20% of revenue, how much it will drive advertising spend in the whole ecosystem. Because these people are willing to spend millions of dollars for TV ads that just get impressions. So like, let's worry about these big players coming in with that kind of stuff. And then also like, how are they going to manage their ads? Are they going to be doing it internally? Is there going to be a bunch of $250,000 a year corporate jobs to be Amazon managers at these corporations coming soon? Like what's going to be kind of the next 6 months of these companies, and how much are they going to act like this is the next new normal and say, hey, we want to continue doing this Amazon thing? Or how many of them are going to be like, yeah, the vaccine's just around the corner, let's just not do Amazon in the long run? And how many of them are going to kind of shoot themselves in the foot by not using this opportunity to actually push their online presence?
Wow, so a lot of questions there, and those are interesting questions to just take away and just kind of keep revisiting over the next few months, I guess, really. But so, what would you say are the threats and opportunities that come from the big consumer brands coming onto Amazon and taking it more seriously? Assuming that some of them do, some of them will miss the opportunity. I'm sure, like the vaccine's around the corner. I mean, I think what's interesting to me is that I think there is quite a lot of opportunity because for me, I trust data, and I see the curve of infection going rip up like that, and you can't see it, but it's obviously a massive curve up if you're just listening to the audio. And the British government saying things like, "Oh, we're going to be locked down for a month." Now, to me, that I've been here before. I remember saying to my co-host on the podcast, Jason Miles, like, "We're going to be here 16 weeks." Back in March, and I was about right. So there's obviously a kind of denial of reality at some level for some people. How can we take advantage of that? I guess that's the opportunities, and what do you perceive as the threats, and how do we mitigate that?
Sorry, I got
Sorry,
lost
that
there.
was the worst
Yeah,
question in
no,
the
no,
world.
no. I know
Let,
it was the exact time I get like a block of Slack message too, and I'm like, what the heck? Okay,
no
no,
problem.
sorry. Can
Well,
you ask that
let
again?
me restart this a bit again. Let me just
Yeah.
stop the recording and start again.